Good afternoon, everyone. City of Kingston, Ulster County. This is KingstonCitizens.org's Roundtable. What's the process? And What's the Process is a new program we're recording and broadcasting every Sunday at 5 p.m. And we will be tackling local City of Kingston and Ulster County topics with co-hosts here, or your regular co-hosts, and sometimes with guests. Co-hosts include myself. I'm Rebecca Martin. I'm a co-founder and director of KingstonCitizens.org.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm Jennifer Schwartz Berky, urban planner and supporter, advisor, co-founder of Kingston Citizens.
And I'm Lynn Eckert. I'm a professor at Marist College and a former alderwoman in the City of Kingston and Ulster County Legislature.
Great. Thanks for being here, you two, us three. Happy Mother's Day.
Oh, yeah.
Happy Mother's Day. Yeah. I hope that you all are having a great weekend. Great women. You know, one of the things that we added in our press release originally is that combined, the three of us have approximately 60 years of experience in a municipal, county, state, federal government procedure, process, organizing. Wow. That's crazy when you get to that age where you have not only children but 20 years of experience doing something. Well, yeah. And you know, if our watchers are interested in learning more about us or KingstonCitizens.org, you can visit www.KingstonCitizens.org. And we're here today to discuss our topic, which is the Pike Plan and how it was rebuilt and why. We're going to dive into that next week. Jenny, can you just quickly share our topic next week?
Sure. Why don't you read the title and then I'll tell a little bit more about it.
The Fourth Estate, how do we continue to perform this role in a crisis? A conversation with Getty
Schweikaskis.
Yes.
So, yes, Rebecca was telling me that that she noticed that the local newspapers were struggling, and it's normal to struggle at a time when there's an economic crisis because ad revenues are down, and that Ulster Publishing was one of the newspapers that seemed to be dealing with this struggle. So I suggested that we invite Getty because the Fourth Estate, as it's called, is really, in a sense, the fourth branch of government. It's the one that helps keep us, our public sector, accountable. And if there aren't entities to do that, access of the press, or even existence of the press, the government might not be as accountable as it needs to be. So we're going to engage in a discussion with Getty about what are the implications, what's the role of journalism, how does it interact with government, and to keep it accountable and ask the questions that the citizens want to have answered.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It'll be great to have Getty on. All right, so back to tonight. The Pike Plan, how it was rebuilt and why. I thought that what we could do this evening is just give a very brief overview of how the Pike Plan in Kingston, if you're not familiar, it's a canopy that was built in the 70s, early 70s, following urban renewal and a mall culture in the Stockade district of Kingston. And I believe it was built prior to the Stockade district becoming a historic district landmark, right? And that ended up being grandfathered in, and we can get into that a little bit more. So, you know, why we're bringing this up today is because recently in the city, in fact, this past week, there was a special finance committee meeting that was held prior to caucus. So caucus is once a month. The Common Council meets once a month. Caucus it precedes or is before the regular council meeting. Lynn, as you know very well, where you discuss within your caucus an issue and how you're going to vote. There was a special finance committee meeting prior to caucus on Monday to discuss a segment of the Pike Plan in the Uptown, located at 4345 North Front Street. There's been a long-standing problem of that segment, and I think of other segments where the Pike Plan is rotted out, and it happens to be right in front of two businesses. The rotting section that's very noticeable, and the building owner, who also happens to have a business there of hers, has been asking the city to fix it, and here's why. So we'll get into why the community, the business owners would ask the city to fix the Pike Plan, because even though it is attached to their building, it is a structure that the City of Kingston owns and maintains. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it's set up a district, which just like a sewer district or a water district, where those who benefit from it are essentially a part of its tax structure. Although we can talk about this, in recent years, it's been the burden has been shifted back to the city rather than it being a tax district specifically for the building owners in the Uptown Stockade area that it's
Yeah,
attached.
and the city hired engineers and other consultants to get a bid to assess the damage and what the cost would be. And for this one segment, which I believe is 50 linear feet, actually, and it came in at 165, and they put out the bid, and apparently the winning bid came in at 142 or somewhere in and around that area to remove that section of the Pike Plan and rebuild it. And what happened is when they took it down, the building owner wanted it kept off, because for the first time in, what would that be? I mean, for her, she I think came to the area 10 to 15 years ago. So, but that building hasn't seen the light of day since the 1970s. So she wanted it off to remain off. And there was a discussion about whether or not they could do that. And they further explored whether or not they could actually remove the Pike Plan from that entire northern side of North Front Street. So in the end, the council decided it was cost prohibitive to either stabilize it, halt the construction, stabilize it, or to take down the Pike Plan, the whole northern side, even though they had, sounds like, mostly buy-in from the building owners. It happened very fast. And so they ended up, there's a long discussion. You can find all of that on the City of Kingston's website. And as we discussed last week, we showed people where some of these videos are located, or their municipal meetings or videos are located. And they just decided to proceed as planned. So that's why we're bringing it up this week. And I feel like I could, I'm looking at her notes, and there's a lot to say. So I think maybe I'm going to stop and switch gears a little bit, Lynn, because I'd actually like to know, as an alderwoman, in the City of Kingston from 2000 and what years were you were a council member of Ward 1?
4 years ago, roughly 4 years ago.
Right, so it's 2016 and 2017.
2016, 2017. So when was the first time when you were an elected official that the Pike Plan came on your radar? I'm sure that this was actually an issue probably for you at that point in time.
interestingly enough, it really wasn't. There were some ongoing questions about the Pike Plan, but the decisions had already been made to repair. And I remember, you know, I moved to Kingston in 2012, and I remember fairly early on going down to Uptown, and there was a big question about whether to maintain or take down these, you know, these awnings. And that's the first time I had any understanding or knowledge of the contentiousness around the Pike Plan. And all of the owners that I spoke with, business owners in that Uptown area, felt like the awnings, and this is anecdotal, but that the awnings detracted from business and were unsightly and ruined the kind of historic character of Uptown. And honestly, it's one of those issues when you get into office that you just, it's a nightmare to deal with, because both sides have become really polarized and angry, and it's really hard to find a consensus-oriented pathway. But you know, it seems to me that this has been an ongoing nightmare and a bad idea, and really out of sync with the historical character of Uptown. And I think this just raises larger issues about how we move forward in terms of economic development. And I think we have to be thoughtful about it, because part of the reason that people are attracted to come to Kingston, they want to shop here, they want to walk around, they want to buy homes here, whatever it is, it's because of the uniqueness of its historical character. And it seems to me that in terms of city planning, and we can talk about some of the other you know, planning issues that have come up, we're very careless with that historic character.
Mm-hmm.
And we do want economic development, but economic development has to be differentiated. Not any kind of economic development will do. And economic development that is in sync with and compatible with what makes Kingston so unique and quaint, its historic character, is something that I'm in favor of. Everybody's in favor of, you know, greater jobs and economic development. But the question is, what kind of economic development, and is it in sync with historic character? And I think even just your summary here of the history of the Pike Plan, it comes out of the 70s. It comes out of mall culture. You know, two things right now that we're at odds with. You know, malls are closing all around the country. And the data that we have suggests those awnings undermine and undercut shopping and people's willingness to walk in and out of stores. So I think for all of these reasons, it's time to revisit the plan, in addition to the fact that we can't seem to, we keep throwing, you know, good money after bad. We can't seem to fix this problem. And there's a growing consensus on, you know, in Uptown that these awnings should come down. So, but it's hard to get to that consensus when you have people who are dug in, people who made the initial decision and who are going to dig their feet in and fight for the continuation of throwing money at the problem. So,
yeah. And Jenny, you know, I wanted to say, well, speaking of throwing money at the problem, and Jenny, this would be great to get your insight, is that this go around last year, when the city realized that it was going to have to fix this portion of the Pike Plan, it created two surveys. One survey went to business owners, and one survey went to the community at large. And I remember it, and we wrote about it and talked about it, because it was one of those surveys that was very light on real good information on the economics of this thing. And it was, do you favor the Pike Plan or do you not? Rather than getting into the real discussion that we need to have, which is, what does this thing cost? How much will it cost? You know, if 50 linear feet, and granted, this portion of the Pike Plan that they're fixing had an enormous structure on top, a big round awning. It's not just a portion that's
Mid-street, right?
Right, and mid-street portion. But we're talking about way beyond like a $200,000 fix for 50 linear square feet approximately. And it appears that this thing is 13,000 square feet, you know, and so the city didn't provide the real like granular details last year of the costs. And so you had, you know, apparently 628 people took the survey of the community at large. 77% were in favor of repairing and rebuilding, and 23 favored tearing them down. But we only knew on the website, the city estimated that the costs for repair and ongoing maintenance of this 13,000 square foot structure was $450,000, and that versus an estimated cost to remove the whole structure and repair the buildings, the building facades, to be $868,000. So somehow, you know, the costs just don't really make sense. Plus, the council budgeted $16,000 for 1 year in their 2019 budget for maintenance and electricity costs. And I think they've gone beyond that at this point. So the costs aren't clear. And Jenny, what do you see? You were actually on the ground in 2008, 2009, when the conversation was up to to tear down the whole thing and rebuild the whole thing. So what is your sense of these processes?
Okay, so yeah, let's back up for a second, because I think that it's important for our listeners and the public, students of government and students of history and architecture, to unpack a few of these things. One of them is the amount of information by which we make decisions and how we base those decisions on either fact or opinion. The second one is the survey, which I have to say, as a student of social science, you know, urban planning is a social science. We spent a lot of time looking, and I'm sure Lynn knows this as well, she teaches it, looking at how surveys are constructed and whether or not they're accurate and a representation of the universe that is, in fact, exists, which in our universe might be the City of Kingston, for example, and its citizens. So that's another topic. And then there's the question of whether these are authentic, what decisions were made in terms of the structural integrity. So I'd like to walk you through just starting with that one. When I was Deputy Director of Planning for Ulster County, which was from 2004 to about 2012, I became known as someone who had historic preservation experience, and I'd worked with a lot of communities with historic downtowns. And I was approached by some of the owners of the properties because I happened to live uptown for a while, and they knew that I might be able to help them. I had been working with groups in every community in Ulster County. So they came to me and asked me about this because they were going to do a petition. About 39 or 40 of the building owners, as Lynn attests, were really the majority of that group was up in arms about this. They were really unhappy about the idea of having to, first of all, pay for the continued maintenance of it, and its obstruction of the merchandise in their windows, which were designed, let's be clear about this, Victorian architecture and early 20th century storefronts were designed to display like never before, with big, wide, open spans and big plate glass storefront windows. This was an innovation at that time, which really made it possible for people to show it was like the, you know, let's say it was the Amazon, you know, of the time, you know, show people, you know, what they could see. Window shopping became a thing because of that. And
look at this. This is the petition you're talking about, which is on KingstonCitizens.org's website, that shows the number of building owners and business owners back at the time where this was up on the table. This is what you're referring to, right, Jenny?
Right. So, like planners do, I said, okay, let me get the background on this. Let me look at the history of it. And first of all, pulling down the survey of the district from the State Historic Preservation Office, it was clear in the document, and anyone who wants to look at it, all they have to do is Google CRIS, C-R-I-S, and OPRHP, and they can go into that database and pull that down. It's public information. The Pike Plan is not a contributing feature to the significance of the district. What does that mean? It means that it's actually not deemed a part of what is considered valuable to the history. And also, let's be clear about another thing. It's not a local landmark. It's in the district, but it's not a local landmark. It was never inventoried as a part of that. The local inventory relies very heavily on the state's inventory. And state and national register, which this district is on, it's actually on the state and national register of historic places as a district, doesn't mean you can't demolish a structure. Only local law and local zoning laws, local landmark laws, can prevent the demolition of a structure unless the owner faces significant hardships and can demonstrate that. So I just wanted to be clear about that. And so I contacted the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and their experts said to me, what, you haven't taken that down yet? Almost every community that built 1960s and 70s canopies to combat malls have taken them down and have seen a tenfold increase in the foot traffic and the business, and the business owners have been much happier with that. Also because when you attach these canopies to these buildings, you intrude in the integrity of the facade, and we knew that it was causing a lot of harm, in fact, to the buildings, and still does.
Jenny, yeah, one of the things that you brought forward, and that we can actually go back and talk a little bit about, was that there's something that happens, though, with a structure like this once a community accepts federal funds for repair.
Yes, and
right?
that's a very important feature that's actually written into the legal aspects of municipal historic preservation, which is a document put out by the state historic, the Department of State. In fact, I rewrote it last year for them, so they're going to be issuing hopefully a new version of it. Just a little plug for it. But when you want to know something about municipal law, go to the Department of State website. It's there. You go.
Boom.
So look, 10 years ago when they were accepting funds for this, they had a big decision to make, because once you do accept federal funds for a landmark, that voids some of the things I just said. For instance, at that point, if the federal government has made an investment in it, you're no longer permitted to just demolish it. Essentially, you create a covenant with the funds that you receive, and you are essentially entering into an agreement not to demolish. So they would have to explore whether or not they would be able to somehow reverse that covenant if for some reason there were a strong public interest argument to do so.
Yeah, and let's just we're skipping around in terms of the timeline, but it seems as though back in around 2006 or so, there was money that had been allocated that was coming from Congressman Maurice Hinchey, that I'm just looking here, that it looks as though it was well beyond the easement that was secured somehow. There was a $1.8 million renovation project, right, to bring the Uptown District's Pike Plan that had been deteriorating since the 1970s back again, and that the amount of money that was coming forward was sort of a mix of things. There was a bond. There was a $100,000 bond that the City of Kingston floated. there was $860,000, it looks like, in earmarks from the federal government by U.S. Representative Maurice Hinchey, whose contribution, my understanding of that money initially, was that it was earmarked for sidewalk, for a sidewalk project, and somehow moved its way up the walls of the buildings and ended up in the Pike Plan. Lynn, you're shaking your head. Do you recall something about that?
I was just thinking to myself, you know, as you were introducing this whole issue at the beginning, you know, we're in the city of Kingston, particularly uptown, where we have bluestone sidewalks. We're the owners of the house, are totally responsible for the cost and the upkeep of sidewalks. And those bluestones are historic and they're terribly expensive. And what happens if they crack and they're uneven and all of this stuff. And it's kind of fascinating to me that, you know, in uptown here, we have these canopies that are problematic from a variety of different respects. And the city of Kingston is responsible for the upkeep of them. We're supposed to have this tax district. So I think this is kind of part of the problem in a sense, because the city of Kingston keeps subsidizing these canopies that nobody wants, you know, and it strikes me as unusual given that everywhere else in the city, we're responsible for elements that are outside of our homes and our public use. And so I'm not making a case here that business owners in uptown ought to pay for the canopies. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there's a real disjuncture here in the way that these uptown canopies have been financed and that we've attempted to maintain them versus the way the cost structure and the way we pay for upkeep and public use in other parts of the city with respect to sidewalks. And that disjuncture sort of strikes me as a potential problem and speaks to the kind of unique and bizarre nature of the canopies in uptown. So that's kind of why I you know, am kind of taken aback at the way in which this whole situation is structured.
So the argument was made because, you know, it used to be that the owners did pay hundreds of dollars a year to be a part of that district, and they had no choice. And I think the argument was made that all of the city benefits from the activity uptown, all of the city benefits, if you will, from the existence of the Pike Plan. So all of the city should pay to support it because it's not for the onus to fall on the building owners, especially after the fact that in less than 10 short years of pouring that much money into it, that it should be half again as expensive to rehabilitate. And so I think I think it's a little different than the sidewalks. I appreciate the value of the sidewalks because of their historic nature and because if citizens were to understand actually how much more enduring they are and actually how easy it is to repair them if you have a little leverage under the stone and a little sand, it's really not as hard as people think. I happen to be a big proponent of them. But in any event, getting back to the district, it was actually decided under Mayor Noble's administration that they should, in fact, revert to the city's care. And I think that the argument was made that it was because it was a public good. So I think that that's actually a fair thing.
I do too, and that was in 2017. Yep, Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, I would have been on the council at that time, and I don't mean to suggest that the owners in uptown ought to be burdened with, you know, this structure that many of them don't want. But the irony of the public taking on ownership in the name of the public, these canopies, is that we're stuck with them. And it would be a kind of different set of political circumstances if the owners were taking care of these canopies, because they'd be gone. You know, these owners would not put up with the, I mean, it's really astounding, right? It would be interesting to calculate the real costs of both building and fixing and keeping up these canopies and the $16,000 to get a consultant in here, et cetera.
Right.
Alongside of the cost to just simply tear it down, right? And in calculating that cost, there would be features of calculating that cost that would be hard to put your finger on. Because if indeed it's true that once you remove the canopy, you get more foot traffic, the windows open up, people go into these stores, they're purchasing more. That would have to be a part of the calculation as well. And
That's right. Right.
Well, and you know what's really striking? I'm sorry, Lynn. Yeah.
I don't mean to suggest the owners uptown are responsible. It just seems to me that it's kind of ironic. Here we are, you know, charged with fixing our bluestone, which is, you know, and I happen to agree with you. Bluestone is what makes Kingston, again, historically unique, and you want to upkeep. And so I'm not making an argument on either side, only to say that the politics of this and the way where it structures outcomes. And it's kind of ironic, because if you were an individual business owner and you had to keep throwing good money after bad, this would not continue.
You know, I wanted to say about the bluestone that if you diagnose a problem in a community, like the fact that people don't know how to repair their bluestone or that it's troublesome for them, why wouldn't you want to create something that would facilitate it being easier for them? Because I can tell you that it's really not that hard and that there are ways to do it. But if there's a disconnect with the public, why not identify that disconnect? Not just having a bluestone bank, which most people don't know about, but even a clinic or just a service that would help them maintain it. Why? Because we know that the bluestones are what make Kingston unique, and that by maintaining them, we maintain the heritage of a community that heritage happens to contribute significantly to its economic benefit. In fact, this is my professional background. I work on the economic development of historic communities. That's actually where I started my work, and have done so, in fact, all over the world. And it's just a proven fact. In fact, Kingston understands this, but I think the question is, how do you make that operational? How do you understand, like you said, Lynn, what the true cost benefit analysis is, not just of the physical removal of the structures, but what the externalities, in other words, what the other benefits of it would be. And I am totally with you. We need a very solid cost benefit analysis of those questions. So what does what does it cost to take down? Are there funds to restore the facade? In fact, there's a lot of funding available for facade restoration for building owners. And the city could certainly go for some of that. Building owners themselves could go for that. Some of it is available from the local development corporation, the Kingston Development Corporation. They actually have a program that matches that money. So there are ways to do this. And I think that all needs to go into a quick, not lengthy and or expensive cost benefit analysis. We have the information. And in fact, 10 years ago, it was told to me that there was some kind of an analysis of the cost of taking them down, but I never saw the document. I think the decision was sort of made that the train had left the station, and they were going to take that money and they were going to use it to restore the Pike Plan.
Let's get into since we're here.
I just say something more macro level too, which is to say that, you know, we're talking about things that may on the surface appear disconnected. Like we're talking about bluestone, we're talking about canopy, and it seems to me the way in which they're connected is sort of my initial point, and that is Kingston really, this is all part of a more endemic problem for Kingston, and Kingston needs to figure out how to link its economic development with its history. It needs to figure out how to both maintain that history and in some sense trade off on it, right? Because that's what makes us, the bluestone makes us unique. I think the bluestone's a public good, and we should be figuring out how to think of it in that way and repair it in the way. At the same time, for the reason the bluestone is a public good, canopies aren't. You know, they're not compatible with our history. And we need to have a better sense of what that history is, because it is genuinely what makes Kingston unique. And it's genuinely what brings people here.
Right.
You know, companies that are innovative, that bring lots of jobs, that are going to be competitive in the future are those organizations that want to come to a place that is unique, that has history, that has culture. And we have that in abundance.
Well, we're losing, we don't even have that much to lose, actually. But
But
we continue to lose it because the bluestone issue, we could talk about that another time, but I mean, there's been resistance. And I mean, I've watched and been involved in all kinds of efforts to try to figure out how to initiate a program inside of the city to help homeowners restore their sidewalks with bluestone. We've done presentations, we've done mapping out of masons that do it. The resistance, we've had tours of the Bluestone Bank. You know, the DPW is in charge of the Bluestone Bank, which is kind of a strange thing. It should probably be the planning department, and better yet, the planning department should be planning and historic preservation in a city like this. I mean, it doesn't really make sense the way our systems are set up, and I don't think I'm
well,
saying
and
anything revelatory. I think a lot of people agree.
Actually, you know, they've added the historic preservation element to some extent into the planning department. I think the reason that DPW is in charge is because of the need to maintain the materials and transport them. And in fact, I do know people who have asked for bluestone from the bank and have had it deposited at their home, you know, in due course. And I think it's less to me a question of that specific item than it is a question of the relationship among the departments and the management of resources. If that were something that were, you know, a well-oiled, and I don't know what it's like now. Maybe it's a very different time than when I was working with the
No,
city.
it's not. But let's not go too much further into the bluestone issue for now. But what I would like to do was circle back with the Pike Plan, because when the survey came up last year, what I noticed was that there was a real lack of folks around with the memory of knowing that a decade earlier we were having the same conversation. And I'd like to just bring that forward a little bit to inspire some more conversation. So we talked about funding sources, a mixture of funding sources that were secured in order to rebuild the Pike Plan in and around 2009 to the tune of $1.8 million. Mm-hmm. And at that point, there was still the district, the Pike Plan tax. So building owners would pay into this tax that was meant to maintain it. And it was overseen by a Pike Plan commission that had, I think, 7 members or 9 members at the time. And so the partnerships were kind of interesting, looking back to see who was involved at that time. And along with the, let me just see where that is here, along with the RBA group, which was the company that was under contract to the city to implement, mm-hmm. Jenny, you probably remember this, the Uptown Stockade Area Transportation Plan.
Right. Well, it was in fact the funds from Hinchy, from what I understand, because they were for sidewalks, were DOT funds.
Exactly.
DOT.
Right. And so the city was involved. The former Economic Development Director, Steve Finkel, mm-hmm. Ulster County Planning Director, Dennis Doyle, Rupco was involved. Scenic Hudson was involved, Cuba, and all of them wanted the money spent for a myriad of projects concerning the uptown revitalization and transportation plans that had been completed. And I, you know, reading some of the articles that are up there, I think there was some concern that they wanted that money spent just to assure that the city could, I don't know if this is true, this is what I've gleaned, but wanting the city to be in good standing for stimulus package money that was at the time, in, you know, around 2008, 2010. I mean, there were all sorts of folks involved, including Brad Will of Ashokan Architecture, who became an alderman of Ward 3, Robert Young. who was a Pike Plan Commission member, etc. So Rupco had gotten a $200,000 grant for this project, and had to really, I think there were delays in this process. But let me just get to there's so much to read, and you can find a really great article that Steve Hopkins wrote back in 2009 on kingstoncitizens.org that gets into more of the details. But what ended up happening is that petition, circling back to the petition that you mentioned from 2010, was created, and 30 property owners and 36 business owners, that was actually led by real estate broker John Hoyd. And they not only had their names listed, but a visual, so you could see all the buildings were in red of those who wanted the Pike Plan taken down. And it's pretty astonishing, the outcry at the time back then to remove the Pike Plan from the buildings. They did not succeed, and the Pike Plan was built, right?
Actually, that's a very good, could I just say something there?
Please do.
That Pike Plan that's up there now is not what was there before.
Right.
And so this is also an important point, because there was a lot of nostalgia about it and the demand that it be landmarked, that it be considered a historic landmark. And so there were discussions back and forth with the State Historic Preservation Office, in which there was a nomination of sorts made. I couldn't find it online, so I'm not sure whether it ever was finally implemented. In other words, I don't know whether it went to the state board and actually received the designation, but there were a lot of arguments made that this needs to be landmarked, that it was the heritage of Kingston, et cetera, et cetera. And in historic preservation of the United States, at least, the authenticity of the object is actually a big part. Maintaining the existing fabric of something is a big part of whether or not it's considered a landmark. This is not true in all landmarks. For example, in Kyoto, when they restore a temple, they replace almost every piece of wood in it and still consider it to be authentic. But in the United States, the existing fabric must be maintained. And what they did instead was they took the whole thing down, more or less, and they built a new one. So in a sense, it was a simulacrum of the original piece of
Pike. I'm not sure how much they spent on it, but Lynn and Jenny, let's just say it was 1.8 million, 1.2 million, whatever it was. We know that within 15 months it was rotting out, and that the city was dealing with it. And I don't know to the extent of the rot at this point with the structure. We know it's bad enough that they have to replace a segment of it. But what's striking to me is to rebuild it, take it down and rebuild it 10 years ago was $1.2, $1.5 million. So it's confusing to me what the city has up on their website when they say to repair the Pike Plan is $450,000. But this portion, the 45, the section of the 4345 North Front is well over 200,000.
So that must be the part that's experiencing the most rot. And one of the reasons for that is, generally speaking, that these Victorian buildings are designed to send water off of them in a certain way. And the fact that they have this attachment, which is basically foreign to them, means that they have to deal with the drainage in a whole new way. And I think that is part of the difficulty of creating a sort of addition to these buildings, which is what it is, and not expecting there to be harm or maybe a difference in the way it responds from one building to the next.
I mean, we're speculating here, but do you think that that's enough money? Do you think that that's, I mean, I don't think
it's ever going to be enough money. And the reason is because the way it's built leaves a lot of questions unanswered, like how is the connection and the drainage and the relationship to the existing building going to fare over time? Not to mention those materials are pretty much, I don't know if it's plywood and a bunch of other things that are not really the most enduring materials, but that's the way it was originally built, almost like stagecraft. They were
What do you,
almost like a World's Fair building. Like it was not built to be permanent. It was built to be temporary in
that's
the
for
first place.
sure. Lynn,
Yeah.
what were you going to say?
That's, that's the case with a lot of these old buildings in Kingston, including the house I live in. We have Yankee gutters, and the Yankee gutters were built in a certain way with a slate roof and copper lining, and were designed to expand and contract. And once you change the materials with more modern materials, you affect a whole dynamic system that was designed to deal with water. And it's no different with attaching what is modern materials to these Victorian buildings. You're messing with the way the building was holistically designed to deal with water. And so this is enormously problematic, and it's not clear in any of these plans that that was taken into consideration or even thought about.
What do you think is, now, so this is an interesting moment because the city has proceeded to repair a segment of the Pike Plan and reveal the beauty of the building behind it, beneath it. I love walking up there. Even in the midst of COVID, one of the businesses is open and you have to wear a mask and there's social distancing, but you can pick up your bread, each week there, and it's just beautiful and it's open. And now, there's been a little discussion, and I think one of the major gaps that's been revealed is what are really the costs? What does $450,000 mean? What does $868,000 mean? Where do these numbers come from?
Yeah,
So,
and I think another question is there a long-term projection if it was so quick to rot? Is there a projection of how much this is going to continue to cost?
right. And so what do you both, I'd love to hear both of you give your assessment of what would be the best next step, a process step. So they're going to repair this segment, and then we're still left with these open questions, and the city may or may not pursue them, but they need to be pursued, right? We've revealed again another questionable an open question. What does this all mean? So Jenny and Lynn, what?
Well, you heard me already say that I'm kind of a proponent of the much more authentic fabric of the original uptown, Rhinebeck, New Paltz, whatever, Woodstock. You don't need a canopy to go shopping there, and it's in fact the opposite. It's probably much more successful as a result of the beauty and differentiation of the buildings and the accessibility of their facade. But what I think is really needed is an honest and even-handed assessment of what the long-term costs and benefits would be to maintaining it or taking it down. And I think the argument could be made that even though federal funds were used, that the original assessment wasn't complete enough to demonstrate that a covenant is something that was entered into with the full knowledge available to the community in terms of its obligation to continuously maintain this continually rotting structure.
What about you, Lynn?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate for taking it down. I think we've played around with it for enough time. It hasn't worked. It's not at all clear to me either if we've come to any good conclusions about why. Have there been any good studies as to why these canopies are leaking and rotting? And I think Jenny provides some good insight in terms of the historic architecture and nature of the building. And if that's true, then there is no fix, or the fix is going to be far more expensive than we're acknowledging. And it just seems to me, for me, it's about looking at the unique character of Uptown and its history. When you walk through Uptown, it's enormously quaint. It's almost like you're taken back into a different moment in time. And that's worth preserving, and it's worth differentiating us from other locales. And it's worth looking at the Pike Plan as not just an isolated event, but instead something more endemic going on throughout Kingston. You can point to the Kingstonian, you can point to the Bluestone discussion that we've just had, and that's I think, and you can point to the way in which the Historic Preservation Council had been unceremoniously
apart. Yeah.
And I think it's short-sighted, it's unfortunate, and the politics surrounding the Pike Plan are ugly. The people who are invested in it, who have ego in the game, aren't gonna take an honest and humble assessment of the way in which it's fallen short and changed direction. And they're still around, and they're still very vocal, and you know, they'll take great umbrage at the idea that they made a decision 20 years ago, which can happen to any of us, by the way. You know, you're in city government, you see information before you, you make a decision, and then you find out a pathway that you're mistaken. It's not a personal attack, right?
And I think, Lynn, I just want to jump in and say that's why this is so important, not to be looking at the Pike Plan as it is today, but understanding the history, and part of the process in making better decisions is to know what's happened before. And I think the process that I remember it a decade ago. You know, I heard the council this past week going and pointing back to the survey that the city did last January, as if that survey indicates that overall the community members agree, they love the Pike Plan, it keeps them dry, but that survey doesn't tell the story, you know, of the financial picture. It doesn't tell the story of how we got to the place that we were. And you know, another thing too is this lawsuit. I think the city ended up suing the contractor for the actual work within 15 months of the work being done. And as I recall, the lawsuit was $1.2 million, and the city settled for $315,000. So we lost. Maybe that covers the bond or something.
I was in office as that lawsuit was ongoing, and we would get periodic updates. And it just seems to me that, you know, Jenny pointed this out earlier, surveys are potentially problematic, particularly when they don't provide enough information for people who are disinterested, working every day, not really following the details of what's going on, and you ask them what they think about a particular policy issue, and then as is our culture,
all the information
weigh in, and they try to be helpful, and they try to give you an answer, but if the answer is an uninformed one, it's not helpful.
Right.
So there are all sorts of, you know, we talk about this in American politics all the time, you know, people don't know where Kashmir is. They don't know what the argument is between India and Pakistan and how potentially dangerous it is. If you want to send out a public opinion survey and ask them what to do if something happens in Kashmir, they think you're talking about a sweater. You know, and if the survey comes back and says 70% of the population thinks X, I don't want to hear from that 70% because they're unaware of vital facts and information about the area. And so it seems to me like you have to be careful with surveys, because just to survey out and then to get a response back doesn't mean that that's an accurate opinion, a picture of public opinion.
And especially if that's all you do, that's all that they did.
Well, and that comes back to the transparency in decision making. Is a survey intended to yield a certain result, or is it an unbiased effort to, and using really correct methodology to find out what the public thinks? So this is really important stuff. This is stuff that that government should be responsible for. It should not be something that just shows up in a newspaper and that isn't vetted carefully to make sure that the results are going to reveal to the public what they need to know before they can make that decision. And I think that gets back to the mission of Kingston Citizens, which is really, are we advocating for a certain position, or are we advocating for more transparency in decision making, having all the facts before you make that decision? And I really think that that's what this whole discussion is about.
And I just want to just add to that, Lynn, just or Jenny. I'm sorry, I forgot. I can't see who. I just had our document up. Who
Yeah, I
was
wanted
speaking.
to actually share something with you when
Yeah,
you're.
in a second. I just want to say one thing about Kingston Citizens, though, and it's that one of the, Kingston Citizens does sometimes get, there's the thought process that we take a position, but really what we'd like to do is get involved early enough that the public can be engaged and have a seat at the table where decisions are being made collectively, and not at the very last moment where everybody has to jump in, where they didn't know about whatever it is, that's on the table for the city at any given time, if that's clear. In other words, it would be wonderful to continue to build sophistication in civics, and that people could become more understanding of local process.
Right. You shouldn't underestimate the public's intelligence.
And to guide the decision, not to have to interrupt, something that's just about to happen because people just want to understand what's happening. So, so on that note, Jenny, you want to share a photograph?
I just want to share a little epilogue with everyone. I'm going to put this on the screen. So of the many communities across the United States that have considered removing their canopies, Toccoa is one that succeeded. Now, like I said, there were literally hundreds of communities that had canopies, and that the National Trust actually worked with them to help them consider the costs and benefits, something we could have done, something we could still do. If we talk with historic preservation and economic development professionals, we could do this right. And so I advocate a little bit of a pause to do this, and I realize that these are crisis times, so people are making decisions without necessarily having access to all the facts. But if you look at the what the canopies looked like in Toccoa, just a moment, what they looked like in Toccoa, hold on, before they were taken down. Oh my goodness.
That's okay.
Hold on. Sorry. They were, look how they disfigured that historic Main Street that you saw on the cover just a minute ago.
That looks familiar.
Well, it looks like what Poughkeepsie looked like on Main Street till I think they had a mall like that. Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn had something like this. It was dead. I mean, this is like on a good day, okay? And one of the reasons that they were taken down was because they were really inhibiting the character of the place. And what we know about Main Street revival is that people are not seeking the bargain on Main Street. They're going there for the experience. And what Lynn was talking about earlier was exactly right. It's the history is what sells them. They come there to be around other people, maybe not at the present moment, but they go to downtowns more and more because they can shop online if they want to, but that's not why they're there. They're there to enjoy the experience of being in what is almost like an outdoor room, a beautiful public living room.
Jenny, can you show the picture of the buildings where the canopies are removed in the same?
Yeah, so going back to the our document, I pulled up a picture of what it looked like. Can you see this, everyone?
Mm-hmm.
What it looked like after they removed the canopies. And what you can see from this excellent picture is that there is some, I don't know if you can see my cursor, there is definitely some damage where the canopies were. This is the same Main Street. And there were some facades that were tinkered with a little, like they have maybe new cladding and so on. But look how much more interesting and varied the streetscape looks, because the canopy no longer disfigures the original design and the ensemble of these buildings. I think it's spectacular. What a contrast.
Yeah. Lynn, what do you think?
And, again, for the life of me, I don't really understand the direction that Kingston's taken, because the aesthetics are the key and the architecture is the key, and the history is the key to our economic development and our future. And it seems at every turn we keep getting confused, and I hope that, and very polarized at the same time too. And I hope we can take a step back. I think there are ways, for example, in terms of the Kingstonian, where we could create a design that's more compatible and more in scale with Uptown. So this sort of either or proposition is really problematic, but we do need to have some kind of coherent, comprehensive plan that ties our history and ties our architecture to our economic future, and that seems to somehow have been lost.
As we sum up today's program, what are some steps that our community can take to help to support that, to help to support our elected and appointed officials to, because it's an overwhelming thought process. What do you do? So what do you do? What's a starting point?
I mean, I would like to see a greater reaching out, a greater consensus. I think, in my time observing Kingston politics and or being a part of it, we tend, and I think I said this last episode, we tend to waste a lot of political capital in not taking the time, which it takes some skill and time and resources to build consensus and to have productive conversations. But instead, it often feels like we have this goal, and the idea is to structure the process to get to the goal rather than to structure the process around transparency and openness and building consensus.
Right.
And that's one way to generate policy. I think it's a bad way. And I think sometimes those in power tend to think, just sort of pushing something through and creating a survey mechanism to get the end result that you want, or saying, well, we went to these organizations and we spoke to them and we're good to go. We don't have to build consensus or educate or do those sorts of things more formally. They think that's quicker and more efficient. But in the end, it leads to decisions that are contentious, that lack, a credibility. And in the long run, you have, as an academic, you sit at a table and you hear a lot of different perspectives that are different than your own, because you want to see the vulnerabilities in your argument. You want to see what you're missing. Is there some aspect that you missed and you forgot about, and someone's highlighting and critiquing you, and that's going to lead for you to address that critique and ultimately to revise your theory and create something stronger. And if we had that sensibility about our politics, if we had that sensibility around the Kingstonian, if we had that sensibility around the Pike Plan, if we had that sensibility around the Bluestone, and the list goes on and on and on, we'd be in a different place.
Yes.
And so for me, I would go into the political arena and I would advocate that you take the canopies off. But at a minimum, let's have an open, transparent conversation. Let's educate people. This is a lot of money for Kingston. And what are we doing? And not only what are we doing, but is there some end game in all of this? Because we're picking one development plan, real estate development, one development plan over here, and doing this over here. And if we don't get our act together in Kingston, we are going to squander what is an incredible natural resource, and that is our history. Mm-hmm. And I'm here. I think so many people are here. You have all these people people coming up from New York and Manhattan and Brooklyn, they're here because of the uniqueness of Kingston. And if we don't get a grip on what that is, and we don't start coming together to have discussions.
And let me just add something. I also think that just to add to this, that the history that's here is also owned by families that are still in Kingston too.
Right.
I mean, it's not only for, I mean, the thing is I love the idea of a building being, or a history being, a natural resource that doesn't have a voice, that needs a voice. Like any environmental, like any species, ecosystems, you know, our history has stories to tell, not only for the future, but also just to the past, to preserve what's here. And I'll tell you, driving up and down Broadway right now and seeing whatever the reasons are that we had to tear out all the trees and tear out, my heart is just like heavy from that. All of those trees that have been here that have also hold history, they're gone. And I see this happening at an accelerated rate in Kingston, and I'm all for change. But I will tell you that I don't quite know how all these decisions are being made. And I'm pretty engaged because things are happening, you know, on such a level, it's difficult to track, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, you know, amen to what you both said, the idea of the history being reflective of the community over long periods of time and not necessarily only being about the consumption of outsiders or tourists or people moving up here, but in fact representative of the culture that has been here and cultivated it for so long. But I want to go back to a bigger thing that Lynn said, which I think is so important. And God, I just love the things you guys say. It feels to me like we might be as a nation in a very different place if the way that we made decisions was really based on listening and full information and true transparency, and maybe even some lively, respectful disagreement that could result in a better decision as a whole. Instead, what we end up with is something that is a foregone conclusion and sometimes an agenda that somebody has, and it doesn't benefit all of us in the long run. And so I'm really grateful for your words of wisdom, both of you. And like I said, I think that if we were to make decisions in that way, with more information, more mutual respect, maybe we would be in a better place, even regarding this current crisis that we're in.
I'll just say too, and I'm not, by any means an architectural historian, but these are public spaces, and there's something really important about protecting these beautiful public spaces, and the way in which you treat your architecture is a reflection of the way in which you treat the people in your city.
Right.
I think the people of our city deserve to have public architecture that reflects our history and is beautiful, frankly. Mm-hmm. I think we've lost that sensibility somewhere along the way. And I don't mean to suggest a kind of kumbaya sort of understanding of leadership and conversation in a democracy, in a local government. There are going to be sharp elbows. People are going to get upset and angry, but we need to have the ongoing conversation, and we need to have leadership that has enough energy and enough courage to take their argument with honesty out into the public realm and make their case. And where they've missed something, to listen and to make adjustments. And by the way, I think if that had been done in the case of the Kingstonian, we'd be in a very, very different position. So, again, for me, there's a systematic endemic problem that's going on, and the Pike Plan is one component of it. And it has to do with leadership, and it has to do with a vision. We need a vision for Kingston, and if we don't get one quickly, we are going to squander what makes us unique. And we have so much potential to be positioned in a way that leads us to greater economic growth. but
Mhm.
not if we don't see it, not if we don't protect what we have, and not if we don't build off of it.
Right.
Right. And I think on that note, that's why this program is important, and I really appreciate everybody's participation. And in the future, it would be really interesting to even diversify our co-host panel and bring more voices to the
Absolutely.
table, because I think it's very important, as you say, to be able to have ideas and have them be challenged and to work to improve.
Yeah,
Right,
and
the direction you're going, there's nothing to be afraid of in that way.
for a lot of Kingstonians who would reject what I just said because it costs money and we're interested in building jobs, and the plan that I've put forth seems pretty far away and pretty dreamy in terms of day-to-day living and getting by and the cost of housing and all of those sorts of things. And it's important to hear that. It's important to hear those critiques.
I agree, and I think that Jenny has left this picture up for us, and I think sometimes for some folks it really comes down to the economics of something, and this is a reminder to us that a one-time fix brings back and highlights the beautiful architecture of a community like this one, like ours, and then gives the building back to the owner to take responsibility and to keep it beautiful. And there's a sense of pride in doing that. And on that note, we've gone a little bit over tonight, but I think it's an important topic. We probably will find ourselves doing that again, and that's the beauty of recording these in advance. Um, Thanks to everyone who's listening. We invite you to make comments on Facebook when we post any questions you might have. We'd love to bring them in to our conversation as we go forward and have your point of view. And maybe in the future, we'll even do live shows. But we are taking small steps to bringing this program. And thank you, Lynn Eckert. Thank you, Jennifer Schwartz Berky. Happy Mother's Day to you both,
You
and
too.
to me too.
Thank you, you too.
Yes, and we will see you all next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.